of all, to anyone joining us live on Facebook, thank you so much. I am Dana. I work for Beyond Type 1 and Beyond Type 2, Tiara. My colleague is here as well. I'll throw it over to her to say hi next. But a little bit of backstory. Beyond Type 1 and Beyond Type 2, serving the Type 1 and Type 2 diabetes communities. Ever since the beginning of COVID, we have really been looking at this as like a uncharted territory as far as how can we best serve our communities during this time. I live with type 1, so it's been, personal as well as professional on that front of adapting and figuring out what is best and how to stay safe. And especially as data has emerged that people with diabetes are, likely in a higher risk group, how do we navigate super uncharted territory? And so that's some of what we're here to talk about today. We're super excited to have some diabetes experts with us who, see patients and can share some of their insights live as part of our work to try to serve the diabetes community through COVID. We have set up coronavirusdiabetes.org with the Beyond Type 1 JDRF Alliance, where we have some really clear recommendations for people with diabetes during coronavirus. They are really a starting point. A lot of it is as simple as like, yes, you should definitely be wearing a mask, but also through like, okay, what do I need to be doing with some of my diabetes management? Keeping things like sick day management and ketones in mind. So I would urge everybody to check it out. We're thrilled to have Cecelia Health on board as a sharing partner for coronavirusdiabetes.org and the Big Little Changes campaign. So the hashtag Big Little Changes is kind of how we're sharing the big little changes people with diabetes can make, and also how we're kind of staying connected as a community, especially now that the best way to do that is virtually and from home. So we're going to be talking a little bit about just the challenges people with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2, are facing, especially in light of coronavirus. Tiara and I can share some insights from the community as well, but really we're excited to hear from some experts. So I don't know, with that, can Tiara maybe introduce yourself, and then we'll get to know who else is here?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Tiara, and I oversee Beyond Type 2. I've been part of the Beyond Type 1 team for about a year and a half now, and I thought I had type 2 diabetes, but it turns out I have LADA diabetes, which is basically type 1. However, with the Beyond Type 2 community, we aim to destigmatize the disease. We're building a community to make sure that people with type 2 diabetes don't feel ashamed of sharing their own personal experiences with the disease. And we believe that information about type 2 doesn't have to be clinical. You can make practical changes starting today to improve your health and your life with type 2. So it's really been just a pleasure and a ride to start to build this community and to have people with type 2 diabetes come out of the woodwork and tell us how they're living beyond poverty with diabetes, and how our information is helping them be more empowered to talk to their doctors and to see diabetes care in a whole new light.
Thank you. And yeah, we're really thrilled to have you guys, collaborating with us on this. And, my name is Vic. I work for Cecelia Health, and we're a digital health company that specializes in diabetes care and chronic care management. We work with a lot of both type 1 and type 2 diabetics, and our CEO and founder is type 1 diabetic. So, there are a lot of people who have a very personal connection to the mission. And ultimately, what our biggest challenge and our biggest goal is to empower people living with diabetes to live a healthier life through coaching, through change management, through making sure that they have all the right information to self-manage and manage their diabetes correctly. And I'm really excited to have, 3 of our certified diabetes educators and care specialists. I think I got that right. So I'll let you guys introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for including me in this panel. I think we've got lots of great information to share, and we can't wait to get this information out there. I'm Wendy Gregor, and I'm a certified diabetes care and education specialist and a dietitian. And I've got some great peers with me today.
Thanks, Wendy.
I'd like to echo that. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Andrea Castleberry, and I am a certified diabetes care and education specialist, which is, as you may know, the new term for certified diabetes educator. I'm also a registered nurse, and I live in the Texas area. I'm really excited to be here today, and thank y'all for having us join.
And yes, so everybody has gotten a chance to speak, and I too am really excited to be here talking with everybody and actually getting to know all of you in the last couple of weeks as we plan this. And for my certified diabetes care and education specialist, we work together all the time on lots of great projects helping folks with diabetes. So I'm Raylene Foster, and I also have a background in biomedical sciences and have done lots of different things with diabetes. So excited to be here today.
Thank you, guys. We're really excited to have you here. Dana, I think you had a question from your community, so maybe let's start with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, as we've started talking about coronavirus and diabetes with the community, there are absolutely themes we keep seeing come up again and again. So we thought we would kind of kick things off with some of those. And we have the opportunity to ask all of you. So I think to start, one question we had kind of that we're seeing is, what are some of the different ways that the shelter in place orders around coronavirus have impacted the self-care behaviors of people with diabetes, right? Because it's not going to be the same thing for everyone. So like, what are we seeing in terms of just changes with how it's going with diabetes management?
Sure, I'll jump in first. We've observed a wide variety of reactions to the shelter-in-place order and this social distancing that continues. And unfortunately, it's been very difficult for many people. And I think we've seen people have their A1C rise as a result of this. Some of the challenges that people face, I think, are less physical activity because they're trapped at home. They're not going to work. They're not moving around as much. They're not going to their gyms. People are spending more time near their kitchen, which means that you've got on just constant visual cues for eating. So we're finding that there's unplanned eating going on and snacking going on. That's a factor. Stress, of course, associated with the loss of a job or your financial stability is in question. Stress in and of itself can raise blood sugar. And also stress eating obviously would raise blood sugar. So these are some of the factors that I've noticed and some of my peers have noticed that are impacting these results. What we're hoping to share today are things such as exercise options at home, talking a little bit more about getting the junk food out of the house, like getting those visual cues out of your home, spending the extra time that you might have at home that you're not eating out, maybe doing some more scratch cooking and practicing that. Pull out your cookbooks and get into the art of cooking a little bit more. It can be really pleasurable to create like that. And, a little bit more prep with fruits and vegetables so that when you're hungry, they're ready for you. And just last but not least, I just want to mention how you can manage stress either through meditation or through prayer, and that both of these can really be ways to quiet the body and the mind during these times.
I think the point about cooking is such a relevant one, and for me especially, I'm not much of a cook, but this has given me an opportunity to cook a lot more. And when you're cooking yourself, it's much easier to control what actually goes into your food, and also how to carb count based on what you're cooking yourself. So when it comes to takeout, sometimes you just have to guess what's in the food, but when you made it yourself, you know exactly how many carbs of which ingredient are in your food, so it makes it easier to bolus yourself accordingly.
I wanted to add one thing that Wendy said, and just such a great answer, Wendy. And I'm excited. I know some of the tips you're going to share, which I think is great. I think one of the things that's come out working with patients that have diabetes is that they are also judging themselves through this time. So not only are they seeing the negative results, there's a lot of negative self-talk. And so I think one of the things for those of you out there listening is to have some self-compassion and some self-love. And whatever that looks like, that's going to be important driving you forward with all of these other tips or tricks that you can use, because we're all kind of going through something that none of us could have planned or prepared for. So I think sometimes just sitting with somebody with diabetes, as us being educators and taking that time to say, it's okay. You're not in this alone. And let's just back up a minute and have some self love. So, with anything you decide to do, just keep that in mind.
So Vic, I'd like to talk about cooking a little bit. So sometimes cooking at home can be great, but it can also be a little bit challenging for people with diabetes, because when you're adding a bunch of ingredients, sometimes you don't know how many carbs you end up with. And so that can be a challenge. And so just would like to encourage the community that there are really great resources out there, recipe builders, where you can enter online. If you just Google search recipe builder, you can enter ingredients for your recipe, and it will give you a carb count when you for the serving size. And so those are some really good resources when you're cooking at home, because it's sometimes using your carb app on your phone can be easier when you're at a takeout place, because it's there and it's readily available, but we all know that food is not generally as healthy for us.
And I also have one thing to add about cooking as well. If you're starting out cooking for the first time, you shouldn't have to put any pressure on yourself to make huge feasts. Sometimes just thinking of it very simply, like if you're someone that just likes chicken or just rice and vegetables, you can kind of put that all together and be satisfied with that. But also, there's also the flavor component. A lot of times when it comes to healthy cooking in general, people think that healthy cooking is bland and flavorless, but there are a lot of things already in your pantry that you already have that you can use to flavor up your foods, and also be able to control the amount of salt or fat content that are going into your foods, as opposed to dining out. And those things could be like lemons or vinegars, or fresh herbs and vegetables that you already have available. So sometimes shopping in your own pantry is a great way to start cooking if you're learning to cook routinely for the first time.
Yeah, that's great. I'd like to piggyback on that and say just being intentional is really important during this time. It's easy to get caught up in the negative self-talk, like Raylene said, but if you just choose one thing to be intentional about and also give yourself grace. So for today, if it's being intentional about your eating, or tomorrow it's being intentional about, looking at and reacting to your continuous glucose monitor readings. Choose one thing at a time and make those big little changes, because they all add up.
I have a question. Are you seeing any changes in management trends or access to care because of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think for some people, care is easier because now they don't have to make the trip to their doctor's office. The doctor is coming to them in their home. And for others that don't have access to a computer or other, smart device, it's made it harder. So I've seen both sides. Something that I found is really neat is that as a provider, it's allowed me a little bit more insight into what's going on in a patient's home, and vice versa. I had my appointment with my endo recently, and I was sitting in a room in my home that has guitars on the wall, and therefore we had this whole conversation about my love for music that he didn't know about before. So it allowed him a little bit of insight into my life. And so I think that's really neat to see how care has shifted and changed, and will probably never go back to exactly the way it was before.
Yeah, I agree with you absolutely, Andrea. I mean, it can go either way. I would say more than not, though, patients have been pretty pleased. So once the access to care is there, when they get through the frustration both in the office and understanding, how am I going to connect with this person virtually? Is this okay to do this over the telephone or via computer? When those hurdles get over with, in talking with some of the providers in my area as well, there's actually more information. People are, they're having more time almost. They're able to talk about some other things and glean stuff that they never would have gleaned in an office visit. So I think that's been maybe a surprising aha that we weren't planning on. And again, there's going to be some patients that, absolutely want to talk to that provider person to person. I had one gentleman that really wanted to talk with the provider, and was adamant, was going to cancel the telemedicine appointments. Finally, he shared with me with tears. He's like, I'm having manly problems. And he's like, and that's not a conversation I want to have over a computer screen or a telephone. And so I almost felt like, gosh, I need to cry with him, but I understood where he was coming from. He needed that, that physical connection. Whereas most other people are like, this has been wonderful to be able to just sit in my home, to not have to deal with the traffic, to not have to be concerned with being out about, in an area that, am I social distancing safely? Am I in an area that maybe there's other sick people if it's a hospital-based area I have to go to? So I don't see it going away at all. But I do still see where we're going to need the physical presence somewhat in some of those situations. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this next question is one I'm personally really curious about. I've been exploring it a little bit with some research. I think it's a tough one. So it has to do with work and work safety and for people with diabetes. As part of our recommendations, we talk about making work as safe as possible. And obviously remote work isn't possible for everyone. It's a real privilege to be able to have a job where you could be home. And a lot of people with diabetes don't have that privilege. So we talk about making work as safe as possible, offer a few recommendations, but I'm really curious to get your insight about how someone with diabetes can functionally make their workplace as safe as possible, and how to kind of look at that, assess risks, and take into account things like their health insurance status tied to that employment. Like, how are you thinking about that, and what can we do to support the community there? I warned you it was a tough question.
No, there are a lot of really good questions and points in there. I think whether we're talking about working out in the community or just being out in the community, a lot of the recommendations are going to be the same, and they're also going to be ever changing. I don't think that we can talk about this without talking about how a month ago the recommendations might have looked a little different than they do today, and depending on what area of the country that you're in. And so I think, obviously, if you can work from home, that's wonderful. And like you mentioned, it's a great privilege to be able to do that. If you can't, then minimizing your exposure as much as possible, washing your hands, before you eat and after you've had contact with, highly surfaces that are touched frequently, especially by others. Anytime you've had any interaction with someone outside of your normal. But one thing that I know Wendy wanted to speak about specifically, one thing that we don't hear talked about a lot, or at least I haven't, is mask hygiene. And we see a lot of, obviously it's important to wear a mask and to be around others who are also wearing a mask when you have to be around others. But we don't talk about the hygiene of taking off a mask and reusing it, making sure that when you take that mask off, your hands are clean. Obviously, if you've been in a store or been around people and you've touched things and then you go and you touch your mask to take it off, well, now your mask could be contaminated. So before you take your mask off, washing your hands. And then if you're using a reusable mask, if you can, throw that mask away and use a new one, and wash your mask if you're using one that's washable. Preferably every evening, wash it while you're at home. So as far as work goes, I think just minimizing your exposure to others as much as possible, trying to set up your work environment in the office to minimize face-to-face contact is really important. And then just good hand washing hygiene and mask hygiene as well.
Let me also add, when we're talking about going back to work, our population with diabetes is so diverse that there really isn't one guideline for everyone with diabetes regarding work. And it's very appropriate if you have any question or any doubt as to whether or not you should go back to work into your old format, you should reach out to your physician and your providers and have a conversation about that. When they can look at your whole health profile, they can look at your other comorbidities, whether you have hypertension, cardiovascular disease, every aspect of your health, and then make an informed decision as to when it's appropriate for you to go back to work in the way that you used to, or if it's really essential that you make modifications until there's a time where we feel it's all safer to be together.
And you've already kind of answered some of this next question, but is there a spectrum of risk associated with different activities, short term as well as over the next year? And how can people decide what they should or shouldn't do?
So I know we talked a little bit about this as educators ahead of time. And so I wanted to speak to a couple things. One is we're still learning some things as we go. We're finding out that what's happening in one country might be different than another country and even different regions in the United States. And I think that's so important, because even talking now, is this an evergreen presentation, or do we learn something 4 months from now that none of us are privy to today? So I think that part is important to say. I think what Andrea and Wendy both covered is never going to change. Trying to be smart, trying to social distance, trying to maintain those habits that keep you safe. I don't think that that's going to change either. But when we get into areas of, are there certain activities that are worse or better? I do know Andrea had some interesting stuff that was more regional that I have not seen come out in my area. I live in the Midwest, but Andrea lives in a different area. And so I think that would be great for her to share. The one thing I wanted to add on to that is air filtration, right? So being in different areas with how the air is filtered can make a huge difference with the spread of the virus. And how are we really going to know that, right? We're not experts as to, well, when I go into this building or when I do this. So I think there's going to be more to come with answers to your question. But I am curious, Andrea, with just regionally, some of the stuff you were looking at as far as risk with activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Texas is a big concern right now. And so I was reading an article earlier this week that had ranked different activities in order of risk. And I don't know that I necessarily agreed with them all, but it's just interesting to see, they mentioned, going to the grocery store as a lower risk activity. And you can even lower that risk even more by choosing non-high traffic times to go. And then, things like going out to a restaurant or a bar and socializing with others were risk on the higher side of the spectrum. And so, obviously there's a great range in between. And I think the level at which you're comfortable, depending on, how well your diabetes is controlled, that's a huge part of this. If you're well controlled, your numbers are running great, your risk level is going to be lower if you contract disease for greater complications. But if you're uncontrolled, your blood sugars are running higher, then if you were to get COVID, then you are at a greater risk for more complications. It's just harder to control. As well as, like Wendy mentioned, other comorbidities. And so I think everyone has their own level of comfort within that spectrum, doing different things. And, we already talked about what you can do to mitigate your risk as far as hand hygiene and mask hygiene as well.
Yeah. Our next question is kind of along the same lines. And I think it kind of gets into that, like, who can you talk to help really understand your personal risk? But We wanted to talk a little bit about specific guidance or how we're thinking about older adults with diabetes, considering that as a pretty clear like risk factor when you look at the age breakdown of how things seem to be playing out in the data. So any special considerations for older adults with diabetes? And then also, how can others support that group that's got this double risk factor to consider?
Yeah, they're a special population. Older adults are one of our most vulnerable populations, and we really want to do all that we can to take care of them, and also for them to take better care of themselves. My insight to what I've seen with this population, with the older adults, is that the feeling of isolation and feeling lonely, that's under normal circumstances, seniors can feel isolated. So the pandemic has really exacerbated that problem. I was talking to a patient yesterday on the phone, and she said, I counted, and I think I ate alone for 84 days in a row. And that's really sad. So kind of broke my heart, but it highlights the need that we have to reach out to older people as we help them. We want to reach out, call them on the phone, FaceTime if they know how. They hunger for contact. And when we are visiting older adults, it's very important for us to wear the face mask because that traps our respiratory droplets from landing on them. So the mask is really for us to protect them from whatever we might be carrying, and we still have to maintain our distance. And then I always suggest that you refrain from hugging and kissing and touching hands, but use more I would say we need to show our love and affection with our words and our gestures, things like, I love you. And, even, how we used to always blow kisses. You can kiss within your mask, make the sound, and then do this. And you're like sending a kiss off. So using our words and gestures is important. Seniors need to know how to sanitize their own homes. We all do, actually. It's a really good practice. I brought props with me. So now I brought in my isopropyl alcohol and a clean rag. You put the alcohol on your rag, or you can always, if you can find them, you can use just the Clorox wipes. Sanitize your home. As a senior, if you've had any visitors, then and all of us, I do this as well, go around my house and sanitize all my doorknobs, my light switches, my remotes, the phones that people touch, your kitchen appliances, handles, all of those things are so important, and good behaviors for us to use, and particularly important for our seniors to be taking those precautions as well.
Thanks, Wendy. And speaking of behaviors, this kind of goes back to our first question. People want to know, how can they stay active at home? Depending on where you are, your gyms are still closed, or if they're reopening, you may not feel comfortable going back to your facility. So what are some ways people can be active at home?
So I wanted to jump on this a little bit because I think it comes up so much right now talking with folks. So a few things that I've kind of broken down. One is, what about those projects in your house? Do you have steps in your house? Are you vacuuming? Are you mopping the floor? Are you dusting, you're part of the Mary Poppins crew and you got a magical umbrella? Because people don't realize the insulin sensitivity or the good blood sugar control that can just happen from staying up and being active, less sitting, more moving. So for people stuck, literally stuck in a place they're like, I'm not allowed to go out and walk, I have no place I can bike. Then I would say, one, what are we doing there, right? So that's one thing. Second, obviously, if you have a place to walk or bike, to be able to get out and just move your body, we're meant to be grounded out in nature. That mammalian part of us, we want to be outside doing something. So where you're safely able to do it, I would say that's a second component. The third component, when we think about diabetes specifically, are we getting our muscles worked, and specifically our leg muscles, right? Because what's the biggest users of glucose in the body? The brain is number one, but unfortunately you can't think harder and burn through more glucose. It doesn't work that way, right? But but our leg muscles, they're the biggest muscles that we have. So when, we know in diabetes education, we'll talk about some of these weight bearing activities. The reason those suggestions come up is because guess what? Most of them are using the legs in some way. So for anybody thinking, can I plug in online, and watch a 5 or 10-minute video with some safe exercises? There's millions of them you can plug into. How can I get my legs doing, what they need to be doing to burn activity? So I even did a Zoom call with somebody, and we went through some of the exercises together. What would that look like? Because she doesn't have her own computer, but she was with her daughter, and so her daughter set up Zoom for us to be able to talk about that. So I'm sure lots of other people have to comment, but I think it's multifaceted there. And I think for any of us, it's important to think about all those areas. And then what are we also modeling for the other people in our life, or for other people that maybe are struggling with diabetes, if we can be that positive example, and then laugh at ourselves when we don't. I think that's the other thing. Have a sense of humor about it. So
that's great, Raylene. I love that you can incorporate sanitizing your house and exercising and better glucose control all with one. So that's really good. And I'd like to just also emphasize how resistance training can be so crucial in helping to control blood sugar levels. We hear a lot about cardio exercise, and walking is just one of the best things that you can do for so many different reasons. But even just grabbing some resistance bands, if you can get your hands on some, they're pretty easy to find on Amazon. And then just Google searching resistance band exercises for beginners or for seniors. And there's lots of really great videos out there. If you're doing one and you find it to be too challenging, just stop and you can find another one. So there are some really great resources out there, and those resistance bands do a lot for helping to build muscle. And when you have more muscle at rest, you're burning more calories while you're just sitting. That's good.
I think it would be great if we could all have a Peloton bike in our house. But what I've done since I've started working from home a lot more is I bought one of those racks where you can just mount your bike, and I have like a cheap old bike that I just put in there, and just doing that while I'm on a call, or maybe I have a little break, and just to get a little bit more exercise in. I think all of those things add up in the end, and I think there's definitely ways to do that from home without having to spend too much time or money.
We all have heard of the national recommendations for physical activity, where we're shooting for, 150 minutes a week of heart pumping activity divided up throughout the week. So that's like 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And then we also talked about the importance of strength conditioning, strength training, and the national recommendation is 2 days a week, 2 to 3 days a week of strengthening exercises. And then the most recent guideline that we've added is this reducing your sit time. So you might get your 150 minutes of cardio a week, but then spend the rest of the time behind a monitor at a desk. And we know that that's really not good for our cardiovascular system. And everybody's laughing, right? Because we sit at a desk all day long. So I like to use my phone or some device to remind me at least every hour. At least every hour. You got to get up and go walk around for 2 or 3 minutes, run the stairs, even just change the laundry, but get out of your seat and don't be in your chair for more than 60 minutes at a stretch. So that means if you go to the theater, we're not going to the theater. It means if you're watching a movie, you need to go get up in the middle of the movie at least once, because we definitely have to get up and out of our chair more often.
No Netflix binging then, Wendy. We've got to get up in between. Yeah. And I'm feeling like, gosh, right now, shouldn't we all stand up and set the example? I feel like I need to. I'm feeling guilty. I've been sitting here in front of this thing. I'm going to stand, and it just feels good. Woohoo! I stood up. I moved my body a little bit, right? The little things. It's the little things.
Yeah, I was laughing because I think that like, oh yeah, I focus on getting my cardio in, and then I sit in front of a monitor for many hours a day. Really, you're talking straight to me right there. So, I hear that. I am game for that. Vic, any other questions in the chat? Questions from people tuning in? Or I know we also were going to kind of take an opportunity and maybe do some more general diabetes questions. And while we have everybody on,
I'd like to go back real quick to talk about how we can help our older adults. Many of our older adults are not comfortable ordering things online like the younger generation is. And so if you have an older adult in your life that you can help order groceries online and show them how to do that, I think that's a really great way to help that population that's more at risk.
Yeah, I actually live, this is just a personal suggestion. I live in a pretty small town with a pretty big population of older adults, and via some Facebook groups and Nextdoor, there's a group that's organized, like anyone who is comfortable or is already grocery shopping is kind of getting organized to help do groceries for some of the older members of the community. There's like a senior center that they have partnered with, that they're basically pairing people up, and you can buy groceries for someone and deliver them. So I would say just check out what is going on, like digitally, in your community, and like keep it local. There probably are people, whether they have diabetes or not. I think that population right now, we should be like checking in with, even if you haven't met them before. It's kind of a cool way to like connect with your community while we can't really through the normal ways. So yeah, check that out.
And I have something to add too about like, caring for older adults. I know that sometimes older adults can be very proud and not want to ask for help. So sometimes, for instance, with my grandparents, one of them who has diabetes, instead of just asking, "Hey, are you running out of test strips or lancets?" I just send them to her. They're not really expensive, and I know the type of meter that she uses, but sometimes just going and taking the initiative to send her diabetes supplies goes a long way, because at least at that point, I know that if she has a supply, she's going to test her blood sugar regularly and keep up with her diabetes care.
That's a great point. So one of the questions that's just come in from the chat is around people living with type 1 and managing your blood sugar during exercise. So, so too much cardio can cause drops, and resistance training can cause adrenaline highs. So what are some of the tips for managing your blood sugar while exercising in that way?
That's great. And the answer can be so multifaceted, because it really depends upon, how you're managing your diabetes currently. So, if you're on an insulin pump, obviously using the settings such as the temporary basal rate, or if you're using like tandem control IQ, using the exercise mode or activity rather, can help to raise your target blood glucose during exercise. Exercising with type 1 can be really challenging, especially if you're trying to exercise for weight loss, because a lot of the suggestions out there are, just eat something before you exercise to keep your blood sugar from getting low. Well, that doesn't really help if you're trying to lose weight as a person with type 1 diabetes. So some things that I've seen be really effective are choosing the times of day that you exercise. For example, there's a lot of research around exercising first thing in the morning before you've eaten or given any insulin can actually help to prevent lows. You obviously want to avoid exercising at a time where you have a lot of insulin active in your body. When you're exercising, that insulin that's active in your body, whether it's given from a pump or a shot, it gets used up faster, and that's going to cause you to be more likely to have a low blood sugar while you're exercising. So just choosing the times of day that you exercise can be helpful as well. Raylene, what say you?
Yeah, no, I think you make such a great point, right? Because what have we learned from working with anybody with diabetes? Each person is completely different. There's different variables that we're working with. Probably the biggest challenge for type 1s that I've seen working with athletes is the transitions. And so coronavirus has definitely been a transition for a lot of people. It's the transitioning up to being more active, whether it's weight resistance, core activities, HIIT workouts, training for something, and then going down, right? Because you'll tend to need temporary setting adjustments during those times, but they're not going to stay. So I want to throw that out there. Now, let's say you're a consistent exerciser with someone with type 1 diabetes. Andrea's suggestion, so helpful to not have the insulin on board and to do it first thing in the morning. But if that's not your thing, or you do it after work, or you fit it in whenever you can, right? Which is a suggestion we give. Something is better than nothing. It's really almost keeping an exercise journal. And so for extreme athletes anyways, that don't have diabetes, they keep journals. I did this today. I felt this way. This is what happened. This is what I was eating. This is how I slept. So same sort of thing, except for now you're keeping track of your blood sugars, whether it's with a continuous glucose monitor. And you have to learn your body, and you have to really learn what works, but know that in transitions, it's probably not going to work, right? That's where you hear those tough luck stories of like, I did the same thing this week that I did 2 weeks ago and it didn't work. But what I would say where there's hope is with resistance training. If that's your thing, you might have blood glucose levels that go up temporarily. I would advise then, if you've got any sort of retinopathy, you really do need to check in with your provider about lifting really heavy weights, because that can worsen it, especially if you've had different laser treatments or that's a possibility for you. So please check in if you're doing heavy weightlifting. However, heavy weightlifting, when do we tend to see the low blood sugar or the insulin sensitivity? We tend to see it afterwards, right? Whether it's 2 hours afterwards, 4 hours afterwards. And for somebody that exercises 5, 6, 7 times a week, when are the other times we're going to see low blood sugar? So when does our body pull the glucose, right? It's at night when we sleep. And so some people actually have to use what Andrea was talking about, like a temporary basal, a temporary reduction, or maybe if you're taking a long-acting insulin, you talk with your provider, hey, I'm going to dial this down by a couple of units because I do my heavy lifting twice a week, or I do my long runs twice a week, whatever it might be. That's something, though, the journal, keeping track of yourself, and then sharing that with a certified diabetes care and education specialist that understands exercise, or your provider. I would say that's probably half of the battle. And I've worked with so many people, guys, that it's never perfect with diabetes, but you can exercise, you can have success. Don't have the overwhelming, frustrating days where you're like 20 minutes into it, you have a low blood sugar, right? Yep, I see the shaking of the head, because it's going to happen, but don't let that stop you. Just know if you keep journaling, you keep track of it, you're going to get the hang of it. And most of the time you'll be able to exercise. And as Andrea said, be able to exercise without having to constantly feed yourself carbs. So we could spend all day on exercise, but I think we've, I don't know if anybody else wants to comment.
I'd like to
go ahead.
Address the needs of our type 2 population as well, which is altogether a different experience with exercise, particularly our type 2 population that is not using insulin. Exercise is our best way to kind of lower our peaks. And with older adults and people that are maybe less conditioned, I recommend that they're doing about 10 minutes of walking or some activity, like an hour after a meal, because it's a beautiful way to bring down those blood sugars when they're going to naturally peak. So I really like timing it after meals, which is the exact opposite is what Andrea is suggesting, that when you have the most insulin in your system, it may not be the best time for a type 1, but for type 2s, after meals is a real good strategy, especially if you're not using insulin. It's an excellent way to lower peaks.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. I think in general, we've actually got into a habit of walking after breakfast, lunch, walking our dog after breakfast, lunch, and dinner as a good reminder to like get a little bit of exercise, and it really helps smooth out those peaks, as you said.
And what you mentioned, Vic, is that you're doing it consistently, and that's sometimes a really valuable technique, is to be consistent when you exercise, that so that you learn your own body's reaction to that and you can plan for it better. You might even be able to adjust your carb to insulin ratio if you're going to be exercising in the afternoon before your lunch meal. And so you can kind of adjust. The real challenge is if you're constantly changing the time of day that you exercise. So finding habits and routines and sticking with them can be beneficial.
Yeah. I just wanted to share that, Raylene, it's funny. I had kind of a personal aha moment when you were saying that, because you articulated something I know to be true, but haven't said out loud, which is like, yeah, when I try something new, it never works. And I should probably just expect that. Like, and I kind of do, but maybe I can go into that with a better attitude of like, know that in all likelihood, if I'm picking up a new sport or activity, like the first couple times are going to be weird with blood sugars, and to just be prepared and plan for it to not be a good blood sugar moment. So I don't know. I think that's a powerful way of thinking about it. But yeah, like once you get into a routine, then it can click. So
Yeah,
thank you.
I was going to say that, and routines are great until the athlete gets injured,
Yeah.
like, so there's
Yeah.
always going to be things that come up with diabetes. Me having lived with it for more than 40 years, and I call myself, an athlete in training, but I'm no professional. But it's such an important part of managing both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and it brings so much pleasure and joy. So I would say those are positives too. So I never want somebody to get frustrated or give up. So. Sorry, Andrea, I think you were going to add something. I don't know if somebody was going to add something.
No, you got
Okay.
it.
I just want to quickly jump in and say we had a question, and I'm just mindful that I want to make sure that we get to it. So Todd was asking, what advice would you give to someone who has a fear of hypoglycemia, especially overnight? Sometimes I don't want to bolus after 11 p.m., even if my blood sugar is over 200.
So I'd like to just recognize that fear of hypoglycemia is real and it's okay. And so you shouldn't feel bad about having that. It's a healthy fear as well. But it can in some ways, cause us to run our blood sugars higher than we should, which is in and of itself not healthy. So how do we deal with that and manage it? If you have access to a continuous glucose monitor, I think that can be one of the most empowering things, because it can provide that protection and alert if you do trend low. Sometimes eating a snack at night that has some protein in it, as well as, a little bit of carbohydrate, can help to stabilize the blood glucose level, even if you are bolusing for it. And so, and just being consistent in journaling, like Raylene mentioned with exercise, journaling what you're eating as well and how your blood sugars respond to that, so that you can look back and learn, okay, this worked and this didn't work, is really helpful. But it's a totally legitimate fear for people with diabetes. And, obviously we want to have good glucose control overnight, because that's such a big period of time that goes into our total time in range, that overnight period, so many hours. It's a huge percentage of our time in range. So working through that and gradually bringing the blood sugars down overnight, if you have a fear of overnight lows, I think is helpful.
I have a question. And this is about like diabetes, burnout, and anxiety. I think the pandemic has just put such a huge burden on us that sometimes like diabetes isn't a priority. How can we move past that burnout? And what have you been counseling your patients on what to do about that?
So I would say the first thing is being able to accept where we are with things. I think that's step one, being able to say, it's okay. It's maybe not perfect. I maybe haven't been giving it the time, but there's very good reasons probably for that. And let's say there's no good reasons at all. Well, it happens, right? There's lots of ebbs and flows in the life of diabetes. And so it's really, and one of the things, I actually got this in in the business world years ago, but I've used it so much with folks with diabetes, is saying to yourself, I'm not going to try to fix the world. But if I look at the last week, right, or the last day even, right, let's just be in the present day to day. What's one thing that I think is really good that I'm doing, right? It's good. Like, yeah, I'm getting out of bed in the morning, checking my blood sugar, taking my insulin. Yes, you did something good. All right, that's good. Let's keep that, right? Let's keep that one good thing. So always find one good thing you're doing that you want to keep. And then the second thing is, in these times that you're having more anxiety, more stress, feeling like you're not doing as well with diabetes, what's one thing, a habit, something I've gotten into? What's one thing maybe I want to get rid of that yesterday I didn't do so great, or last week? What's one thing? And it does go back to what Andrea says, just, changing one thing. I talk about 1-degree changes. But looking at it like that, it's not just let's get rid of the negative and the bad, do one thing there, but also what's one positive thing I want to keep doing that I'm already doing. And then this is the third part of it. What's one thing I want to add? So one thing I'm going to stop that it's not helping me, it's not serving me, it's not good. One thing I'm going to keep because boy, I'm doing good. I got that. One thing I'm going to try to add. And guess what? You try it for a day. It's not whether you actually did it, it's that you tried, right? So that's the other important thing. When we have to make a change, when we're going through some diabetes distress, you can't manage everything at that point. So you need to understand that your body literally doesn't have the energy and to just walk yourself through that. So for some people that need a plan, right, they need to know step 1, 2, 3. That's been helpful to have a little bit of structure. But I'm sure that my other colleagues would have great things to add because they work with a lot of folks as well.
I think, Wendy, you mentioned something about, taking time for meditation. Could you speak a bit more about that and in relation to stress management?
Yeah, it really can be overwhelming when you have all of these factors happening at once. I love Raylene's suggestion to try to whittle it down into smaller, manageable goals, and then choose your time that you're going to just quiet yourself. Quieting the mind and body, the quieting response is a great tool to use, and psychologists recommend that you use the quieting response throughout the day, and that sometimes having these quieting responses throughout the day can almost be more effective than having a half hour of meditation once a day. So the quieting response involves coming up with a quieting phrase that you say to yourself, like, it's going to be okay, or it's all right, or I'm okay. Something peaceful, there's some sort of a phrase you can say to yourself that quiets you. Then you focus on taking 2 deep cleansing breaths. And while you're exhaling on your breaths, you let go of some part that's tense in your body. So for me, I tend to draw my shoulders up and clench my chest when I'm stressed. And so I will relax my jaw, drop my shoulders, and exhale. It's going to be okay. And then do that one more time. It's going to be okay. And that's called the quieting response. And you can do it throughout the day. Anytime that you're like up on edge, quiet yourself back down. And that if you do that consistently through the day, it can really be even more effective than one long meditation session. So that's the quieting response.
I found myself breathing with you. And
and let go of something with your shoulders or your face.
Yeah.
I love talking about diabetes burnout. I know that's a weird thing to say, but I think it's not talked about enough. So diabetes burnout is very real. It's going to happen. And you know what? When it happens, it's okay. And I think it's very empowering when you can just recognize that. And then you add on top of it a global pandemic, and it's like, yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, diabetes is stressful enough, managing 24/7, 365. And if you can empower your patients to recognize, and you as a person with diabetes can recognize that everyone goes through a period of diabetes burnout, and it's okay. It's what you have to do is figure out how you're going to get through it. That's what's important. And so, like Raylene said, I love the example that you gave with choosing one thing to recognize that you're doing well, choosing one thing to let go of, and then choosing one thing that you're going to try to change. And do that for a period of time. And then once you've mastered that one thing that you wanted to change, just that's a building block. And then you can choose something else. But don't overwhelm yourself. It's not like you have to go from not managing your diabetes at all to being this person with, 90% time in range. Even if you go from 40% time in range to 45% time in range, that's a huge accomplishment. And you have had to work very hard for that. And that's something that you should be proud of. So just recognizing your accomplishments, no matter how small you feel they are, is really important.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. That's really good insight. All right. I don't think we have any more questions from the chat. So, anyone have any more questions or comments they'd like to make about, just general? Because I think we've already covered a lot of great topics, and I just want to take this opportunity quickly to just thank our amazing CDCESs for doing such a great job answering all these questions and providing all this information. I know, I've been involved in diabetes management for the past 5 years, and I've learned a lot of new things that I never knew I needed to know. So this is really great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. What a great group of people and a great mission of these organizations. So.
Yeah, I feel like I always think I know, like you'd think living with diabetes for so many years and then working in diabetes for so many years, and probably many of you can relate. Like, I love that I learn something new every time I connect with folks like yourself. So thank you. Truly, like, I feel like I personally had some aha moments today. So that's big for me. But I hope that, people listening in did too. And obviously, I would just say, like, if anybody watching has additional questions, reach out to us at Beyond Type 1 or Beyond Type 2, to Cecelia Health. We can connect you with information that's vetted by experts and maybe direct you towards places where you might be able to get one-on-one coaching as well, and work with you on that. And if you are looking for information about coronavirus specifically, also definitely check out coronavirusdiabetes.org. And some of the articles linked there dig in on a lot of the specific topics that we talked about today, like what is work safety and what should I be doing with my mask. So we are publishing articles related to that all the time. And we also want to hear from you about what more questions, concerns, and like how the situation right now is impacting your day-to-day, so we can better provide information. So thank you again.
And yeah, that resource that you mentioned is really, really valuable. And I think what's really important about it is that it is information that's vetted by experts and clinicians. So there's a lot of information on the internet right these days, and you can go on social media and find all sorts of crazy stuff. So having a reliable source where you get the right information is very important. Well, thanks everyone for participating and for tuning in, and we'll hopefully do this again sometime.
Thanks for having us, Vic.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.